Hey, what's going on, everybody? Coming at you on this frigid October 16th. I am Brent Hayden here today talking this two-game slate we have to kick off the NBA season. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot to talk about on this podcast, but still some interesting things to discuss with some injuries and whatnot happening around the league. First and foremost, welcome to my channel. This is going to be called the Daily Dribble with Brent Hayden. I am, of course, Brent Hayden. For those of you that are subscribed to my DFS projections and content package, you guys are already familiar with me. For those of you that may have stumbled across this channel, welcome. Um, you may see me on Twitter quite frequently, but I am formerly of Daily Fantasy Cafe and DFS Datalytics, and I have also spent some time doing some writing in the Fantasy Draft Locker Room along with LakerNation.com. Um, Before we dive in, one quick reminder, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. It definitely helps me out. And if you are interested and you are not already signed up for my DFS projections package, you can find my Twitter link up above in the banner, or you can click it down below in the description. You can hit me up and get some information on that. Definitely don't want to miss out on the projections if you're not already signed up. Extremely affordable option available for you this season. So without further ado, let's discuss this two-game slate we have going on. We have Philly taking on Boston and Oklahoma City heading out to the Bay Area to take on the Golden State Warriors. First game of the night, Philly at Boston, a 206.5 over under. Boston favored by 5 points in this one. Have a little bit of a rematch of the playoffs last season. Wilson Chandler is going to be out for the Sixers. Mike Muscala is doubtful. He is not expected to play in this one. Neither one of those two terribly impactful on this outing. Couple quick notes on this one. Talking some things from the preseason. Boston looked pretty bad at times in the preseason. I don't expect that to continue. Obviously, they're trying to acclimate Hayward in. They had a really weird preseason schedule where they were done with their entire preseason while other teams still had like 2 or 3 games to play. Um, we haven't really seen him in game action in a little while. So not really sure how they're going to come out in this one. It is worth noting that they did play a little bit faster in pace in the preseason. Um, both of these teams actually played pretty close to identical paces with about a 104 in the preseason. I don't know if either one of those teams are going to stick up at that mark. That would be pretty high for a regular season pace, but Boston is probably going to play a little bit faster with some of the guys that they have in this lineup and moving Al Horford down to the five. Boston actually did give up 51 rebounds per game to opponents in the preseason. They pulled down about 48 per game, so didn't really get beat up too much on the glass. I think a lot of those rebounds per game allowed had to do with the fact that they didn't shoot very well. But that's something to keep an eye on. We did have some guys like Jeremy Lamb and Nicholas Batum and Chetty Osman that were actually able to kind of notch more rebounds than would be expected from some guards in this situation. So that could bode well for someone like Ben Simmons, who is actually one of my favorite plays on the slate. If you watched the preseason, Ben Simmons was just all over the place. Dude was just insane. I expect him to have a freaking amazing year. I think he's gonna rack up a ton of triple doubles this season. I absolutely love him in cash games and in formats on this slate. But let's take a look at some of the pricing across some of the sites here. If we pull up DraftKings and we're looking at Philly, Boston, Ben Simmons comes in rather affordable actually at 8,400 over here on DraftKings. I like him. I like the fact that he has point guard shooting, small forward eligibility that opens things up for lineup construction. That's going to make things a little bit interesting. If you're playing over on FanDuel, it's a little bit different because he's 10K and he's point guard eligible. I like that he's point guard eligible. This slate, it makes things maybe a little bit more difficult because of how FanDuel has their guys broken down. But he's one of my top options from this game. Also, it's really tough to overlook Joel Embiid, obviously 10-4 on FanDuel, but over on DraftKings, you'll notice he's 8,800, much more affordable there. So I definitely do not hate starting your lineup out with either one of those guys. I'm leaning towards Ben Simmons in this one, but you could definitely make a case for Embiid, who had some pretty good games against Boston last season and in the playoffs. If you pull up his player card, you can see he averaged almost 50 fantasy points per game against them in 8 outings, while Simmons actually averaged only 34.2. But Simmons' ability to fill it up across the stat sheet just gives him the slight edge in this one for me. But the rest of the guys, you're going to get Markelle Fultz in the starting lineup. Given his price at 5K on DraftKings, and given his price over here on FanDuel at 5,700, really tough to ignore that. I would project him somewhere around 30 minutes tonight. He looked pretty good in the preseason. He actually averaged about 20 fantasy points, 21 fantasy points per game in the preseason, on about 22 minutes. So not too terribly bad. He's another guy who can kind of fill it up across the board. And I mentioned the fact that Boston did give up some rebounds to guards, so that could actually benefit Fultz in this one as well. JJ Redick's going to come off the bench, and he's a very interesting tournament option, especially over here on FanDuel, where shooting guard is kind of terrible outside of a couple options. Obviously, we have Dennis Schroeder, who we'll get to later. But JJ Redick at 5,100 is really, really tough to overlook. He's a guy at 4,900 on DraftKings. That's even better. He's a guy in the preseason actually looked really solid, averaged almost 16 points per game, only played about 21 minutes. He averaged like 8.5 field goal attempts coming off the bench in 21 minutes, so you can extrapolate that out and expect him to maybe get 4 or 5 more field goal attempts. You could see a 20-22 fantasy point floor here for him in this matchup, and I do like taking shots on him. I think he's both cash game and tournament viable in this spot. I'm not terribly high on Robert Covington on either site. On FanDuel, he does you can make a case for him here at 6,500. I do not like that price at all. Like, that's just way too expensive, I think, for how volatile Robert Covington is. But as you can see, you only really have 4 options at small forward on FanDuel tonight. So tournaments, sure, take a shot. The steals upside that he has could benefit you here. I don't really think it's necessary to go there on DraftKings, but at 4,700, definitely tournament viable there. Moving down to the power forward spot, obviously Dario Saric, a guy that you can consider in tournaments, not someone I'm looking at in cash games. But at 5,500, that's a pretty fair price. And we already talked about Joel Embiid. But on the Boston side of things, it's really tough to say how this is going to shake out. Obviously, with Gordon Hayward coming back, he's going to be fairly limited. I would expect maybe 27, 28 minutes out of him. He is not somebody that I'm considering at all in this spot. If you want to take a shot on FanDuel in tournaments, go for it. But the dude shot so poorly in the preseason, like 10% from beyond the arc and like 20-25% from the floor. He doesn't have it yet. He looked slow at times, played a lot of defense with his hands, got in some foul trouble early on in some games. I'm gonna take a wait and see approach on him. Kyrie Irving is an interesting option in tournaments at 7,600 on DraftKings. He's pretty affordable on FanDuel, 8,400. Not the greatest of matchups for him here, but it's Kyrie Irving. And the Sixers actually did struggle at times to defend pick and roll ball handlers. And that's something Kyrie Irving can really take advantage of in this spot. He was one of the best ball handlers in the NBA last season, ranked in the 96th percentile. As a pick and roll ball handler, he's just so good attacking the rim. So he's a guy in tournaments, especially on FanDuel, where you might want to take some shots on like building around Curry and Irving instead of like a Ben Simmons. Irving is definitely interesting there. Marcus Smart, Terry Rozier both expect to kind of eat into each other's minutes, but at their prices, definitely worth some consideration, especially over here on FanDuel. Terry Rozier at 4,100. If he gets you 20, 22 fantasy points, that should be good enough for you there. But like over here on at shooting guard, Marcus Smart 5,700 shooting guard again is a tough spot to fill out tonight. So his ability to get some steals and his defensive ability really bodes well for him over here on FanDuel. On DraftKings, moving down to shooting guard, Jaylen Brown, like I understand there's going to be some concerns about what he's going to be able to do on offense with another mouth to feed, but at 5,300, I can't stop plugging this guy into my lineup. I absolutely love him at that price. It's just too cheap for Jaylen Brown in a matchup. I mean, he averaged like 25 fantasy points per game against him last season in just under 30 minutes. I kind of expect similar minutes out of him tonight. But 5,300, just really safe option there. I do like Tatum a bit here too at 5,600 on DraftKings. Not as high on either guy over on FanDuel. Brown at 5,900 in a tough shooting guard position is fine. Tatum 6,200, kind of priced out of consideration here. But again, there's only really 4, 5 guys, at maybe 6 that you're considering here tonight at power forward. Al Horford, obviously an excellent tournament pivot off of like a Joel Embiid or a Steven Adams or someone else that we're going to get to later. Had decent numbers against the Sixers last season, about a fantasy point per minute. The Sixers are a team that did struggle to defend post-ups. Al Horford posting up 27% of the time last season. Wasn't incredibly efficient in doing so, but I still think given his role in this offense and how active he is, he's going to get some assists. The rebounds are going to be there for him. I like Horford here as a tournament pivot off of some of the expensive guys and a few guys that we're going to talk about. Obviously, Aaron Baines, a guy probably not going to get a ton of minutes, but maybe 14, 16 minutes can get you maybe 20 fantasy points. You can take a tournament shot on him here. Moving on to everyone's favorite game of the night, Oklahoma City at Golden State. 225.5 over under in this one. Golden State favored by 11. We have a lengthy injury report here. Sean Livingston is probable. He's dealing with a foot injury. Draymond Green is going to play. He's not on limited minutes, but they're going to play him shorter stints, so he's still going to be on limited minutes. I actually project him just under 30 minutes tonight. Not someone that's really on my radar here, given his price and given the fact that he's going to play limited minutes. But again, on a site like FanDuel where you have to lock in 2 power forwards and the position is pretty weak, I can understand rolling him out here, especially with his blocks, steals upside. Andre Roberson obviously out. Westbrook is doubtful. He's not going to play. I would be shocked if he plays. Steven Adams is questionable with a back injury, but it does look like he is going to be able to go for this one, but we definitely want to monitor that news. It would take like a broken arm or a broken back to keep him out of this game. Biggest news, obviously, is Westbrook should not play in this game. And with that news, that's going to open up the chalk of the night, and that's going to be Paul George and Dennis Schroeder. In the preseason, George actually had a usage rate of 33.3%, while Schroeder had an almost 30% usage rate. Last season, in 502 minutes without Carmelo, Roberson, or Westbrook on the floor, George had a 41% usage rate and averaged 1.3 fantasy points per minute. Obviously, that's worth noting. Even though it's not the greatest of matchups, George is going to draw some Kevin Durant defense for a lot of this game. The usage is going to be there. I don't see a scenario where you can really fade him, especially on FanDuel here at small forward. Like, given that your 2 other options are really volatile and have really low floors, not building around like Paul George and Kevin Durant is really tough to stomach. So I think on FanDuel tonight you're probably locking in these 2 guys and building that way, and then you lock in Dennis Schroeder, who's going to obviously be in a great spot. The usage is going to be there for him. The price is ridiculously cheap. Don't ask me why he's shooting guard eligible, considering he has actually never played a minute of shooting guard in the NBA. but FanDuel gonna FanDuel, I guess. Over on DraftKings, he has shooting guard eligibility too. Still, I don't understand. I guess they're trying to be proactive, but at 6,300, again, really tough to not lock him in here. And you can lock in Paul George, leaves you about 59.50 for the rest of your lineup. It does make things a little bit interesting as you're working your way through your lineup construction. Billy Donovan hasn't announced his starters for this game yet. Obviously, we know Schroeder, Paul George, and Steven Adams, assuming Adams suits up. Who gets the minutes at power forward and shooting guard is going to be the biggest question of the night. I expect Patrick Patterson to be the guy in the starting lineup for the Thunder at power forward. Unfortunately, Billy Donovan might start Terrence Ferguson here. I really wish he wouldn't. I would prefer him to start Hamidou Diallo. Diallo actually had a really, really solid preseason for OKC. Showed off some impressive things. Even started hitting some 3-pointers, which is something OKC really, really needs. I think Diallo is gonna be really chalky here at 3,100 on DraftKings. Probably gonna be really chalky over here on FanDuel as well. Where is he? He is shooting guard eligible, I'm assuming. Yes, 3,500. So over here on FanDuel, where you actually have your the ability to drop the lowest score at the end of the night, taking a shot on Diallo at 3,500, who could come out and get you 20, 22, 24, 25 fantasy points at 3,500. Pretty solid option. I love locking him in as a value option here. Assuming Oklahoma City gets blown out, which is a safe assumption in this one, Diallo's going to get garbage time in here. So I do really, really like building around him, and especially in tournaments. Jeremy Grant's a guy, I don't care if he's coming off the bench or if he's starting. He's a guy that I absolutely love plugging in my lineups, especially over here, again, on FanDuel at 4,700. Length, athleticism really bodes well for him in this matchup. He's a guy that Donovan has rolled out a few times as a defensive stopper against the Warriors. This game, while it doesn't necessarily seem like it would be terribly important being the first game of the season, it's still going to be important. Oklahoma City needs to win some of these games early on with Russ and Robertson out. So like Jeremy Grant could be a very valuable option here. And his ability, obviously athleticism, ability to attack the rim, makes him an excellent option here. He can get the blocks and he can get the steals. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Serge Ibaka with the way that he can kind of help over and get blocks and then still stretch the floor and hit from three. So I love Grant here. Patterson, I think, is a guy that people are going to talk about tonight. I prefer going Grant and I prefer Diallo over Patterson, but again, on a site like FanDuel where you need two power forwards, don't necessarily hate taking a shot on him. Although the one guy I did skip over here is Marcus Morris. I do like him at his price at 4,500 on FanDuel. So I'm probably going to be building around Marcus Morris and Jeremy Grant at my power forward positions here. Center's where it gets interesting. Obviously, Steven Adams questionable with that back injury. I would expect him to play. It's, again, something that you probably need to keep an eye on. In tournaments, you can take a shot on him. The guy that I actually want to take shots on here in tournaments, especially at his price, is Nerlens Noel. Noel's a guy often maligned, hasn't really been able to show off what he's capable of doing, but he's really good on the defensive end. He's a guy in his career has averaged almost a fantasy point per minute. And if you expect him to get 16, 18, 20 20 minutes tonight in a really fast-paced matchup, given that he's averaged almost a fantasy point per minute, he has a pretty good shot at paying off that salary, especially if he can notch a couple blocks or steals for you over here on FanDuel. And on DraftKings, 3,600, definitely think he can pay off that salary even if he's only getting like 15, 16 minutes. So I definitely like building around him as well as a value center option. The rest of the guys, the Terrence Ferguson, not going there. Dude's just so limited on the offensive end. Alex Sabrinas, if you want to take a shot in tournaments, I think you can with him as well. He's a guy that can get hot from three, and we saw in the playoffs last season he had the ability to do some things on defense. So he's a guy. If you're building a bunch of lineups, I would get some Alex Sabrinas exposure for sure. On the Golden State side of things, it's pretty straightforward. I love Steph Curry in the spot as a pivot off of Kevin Durant. I think Kevin Durant's going to be the chalk option from the Golden State side of things. Obviously, you have the revenge factor, but Curry is a guy that has the ability to just mash in the spot against Dennis Schroeder defense. I think he's going to be an excellent pivot here. And on FanDuel, you could make a case for maybe going him over Ben Simmons at their given prices. So I like both of those options there. Obviously, I already talked about Draymond Green. Tournaments only, not someone I'm really considering because he's going to probably get less than 30 minutes. Kevin Durant, obviously, an excellent option here. Klay Thompson, I don't hate taking a shot on him in tournaments over here, especially on FanDuel where you need two shooting guards. Not someone I'm really considering too heavily, but at 5,900, that's a tough price to overlook. And I mean, he averaged 24, 25 fantasy points against OKC last season. Some of those games took place with, I believe, one or two of them with Roberson. So you could get a decent game out of Klay Thompson here. But that pretty much does it. Just 2-game slate, not a lot to talk about. Again, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and if you're interested in the DFS projection package that I offer and you're not already signed up, make sure you hit me up on Twitter for details, and good luck tonight.